Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yes, my friends, this is the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast, and I am your host, Robert Cluse, and welcome to this podcast. I am pleased as punch. I don't know the words to actually describe this. This is probably going to be my most downloaded or most listened to podcast. I'm guessing, based on the number of emails asking me to have this particular record and this particular band spotlighted on the podcast. And I want to read to you a letter that was well, not a letter, but an email, if you will, that was sent to me about a week and a half ago. I'd actually had another thing planned for this, but I read this email. I said, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to do this one instead because it was so persuasive. And this was by a gentleman named, well, I'm not going to mention his name, but I'll talk about the letter here. I'll just do it verbatim here. It starts out, buddy, and this is what it says. It's got buddy, but it's got 3 extra Y's on it. So, buddy, when are you going to do a podcast about Troyka? And that's the end of the email. And I thought about it for a second, and he was absolutely right. I had kind of put off doing this particular podcast episode because I just wasn't ready for it yet, I think, because the album that Troyka released in 1970 that's spotlighted on this podcast, it at the worst is probably one of the 3 greatest LPs of any genre that ever came out of Edmonton of any time. And you could legitimately argue it to be the number 1 album to ever come out of Edmonton. It's such an interesting album, and it has such an interesting history in it that I really don't know if I'm going to do it justice. I'm going to give it a shot here, and we'll see what it goes. All right, so let's get to it. Troyka, consisting of Rob Edwards, Ron Lukowitsky, hopefully I got that right, Ron Lukowitsky. I always get those names wrong, so if I didn't get it right, I'm sorry, Ron. And also Michael Richards, the guitar player. Got together in the mid-'60s as a royal family, put out a couple of records on, or a couple of 45s on Apex Records in 65, 66. Did okay, didn't set the world on fire. It was great music, but it didn't really stand out from other music of its time, I think, and I think that was the biggest problem. They decided they were going to go to New York City, make their way there, played a little bit more intense music than the royal family, a little bit more of an acid rock, progressive rock, psychedelic rock, or however you want to call it at the time, music. Really gelled as a band, decided to come back to Edmonton and start playing here in Edmonton and around in Saskatchewan and in BC in that area, and Manitoba as well. Really, really built up their reputation as a great, great live band during that time. Changed their name to Troyka and became, literally the band that you're going to hear now coming up here on the podcast. I can't say enough about it. The Troyka record was released in 1970. It came out on Cotillion Records, which was a big label back then. It's a subsidiary of another label, but nonetheless, it was a pretty big record, or pretty big record label back then. And describing the genre of this is very, very hard. It kind of has everything. It certainly has the elements of progressive rock. It certainly has the elements of psychedelic music. It certainly has the elements of acid rock, but it also has elements of Ukrainian music. It also has elements of Polish music. It also has elements of polka music to a certain degree also in it. It has spoken word interludes among the record itself and in different songs. And it's all in this big, gigantic, wonderful, fabulous stew in this record. I just can't say enough about it. It was engineered by Gene Paul, son of Les Paul. Shel Kagan did the producing. If you know anything about Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, you'll know who Shel Kagan is. Very, very much associated with them. So this was big time. This is the big time record here that you're talking about. And they put everything that they had into it, and it came out to this incredible, incredible LP. I'm going to start things off with the introduction of the complete album. This song called Introduction, and the single that came right after that is called Natural. And again, you'll see that that switching, that seamless switching between maybe traditional Ukrainian music, the hard rock that comes right after that. It wouldn't be out of a place of, something like a vanilla fudge kind of a thing going on here. But again, I can't say enough about it. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up. This is Troyka from their great landmark debut self-titled LP from 1970, straight out of Edmonton, Alberta. This is a song called Introduction, followed by Natural, here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Troyka from their self-titled 1970 LP of the same name with a song called Introduction, and then their lead single off the LP with a song called Natural. And again, there's just so many things going on in this record. So many different genres, so many different instruments, so many different feels, so many different atmospheres that you can't help but make something totally original, and this certainly is a totally original LP. I had such a hard time trying to pick songs that I wanted to play on the podcast, and I didn't really wanted to spoil the atmosphere of it. You really should buy this record, buy the CD re-release that I'm going to put a link to on the podcast post page. Listen to it yourself. Listen to it through, all the way through, to get the real full effect of this great LP. And again, I had such a hard time trying to pick out the records or pick out the songs that I wanted to play on the podcast. So I'm just going to kind of bookend it by doing the first two songs of the record and the last two songs of the record. This is a song called Go East, Young Man, where again, they display their chops as a great, great instrumental band, and you'll hear it off this. Plus the ending, which gives a nice coda to the proceedings that went on beforehand. So without further ado, this is Troyka, recorded at Round Sound here in Edmonton, by the way. I forgot to mention that, I think. This is Troyka with a song called Go East, Young Man in the finale here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Troyka with a song called Go East, Young Man, in the finale. Again, go out and get this record. Go to the link that I'm going to put on the podcast post page. Go get the CD reissue. It's worth it. It's totally 1,000% worth it. It has my endorsement. Go check it out. If I had to make a guess as far as what the greatest LP to ever come out of Edmonton is, this is my personal opinion. I think this might be number one, if not number one outright. This is how good this record is. Everybody should listen to it. And as always, I would be remiss without saying that, yes, you can subscribe to me on iTunes. Yes, you can subscribe to me on the TuneIn Radio app. Yes, you can subscribe to me on the Google Play Music app. I think it's still called Google Play Music, but yes, you can subscribe to me there as well. I also have a brand new Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast YouTube channel that you can get all the downloads for all of the podcasts and things that didn't quite make the podcast, full comedy albums and things like that from the 70s. You can get that there. And also, I'm on Podmatic. That's where I started out. You can subscribe to me there and listen to me there. And I think that's about it. So next time, I'll see y'all later.